In the high-stakes world of American politics, nothing was more shocking than the news that Judge Amy Coney Barrett, a justice of the Supreme Court, had ruled to impose a $500 million fine on Karoline Leavitt, the fiery and unyielding White House press secretary under President Donald Trump. It seemed like the ultimate irony, one of the most conservative figures in American politics facing a judgment from a figure of the same ideology. But the circumstances surrounding the fine were far from ordinary. Karoline, known for her unflappable demeanor during press briefings, was caught in a legal storm that no one saw coming. It all began with a contentious case that had been brewing for months. A legal battle between the White House and several media organizations that had accused the administration of illegally blocking access to information. The plaintiffs, which included high-profile journalists, had claimed that Karoline Leavitt had intentionally misled the press and obstructed their ability to perform their duties by withholding important documents. The charges against her were explosive, and the court's decision would have ramifications far beyond the walls of the White House. As the trial began, the courtroom was packed with reporters, cameras, and politicians. It felt more like a political spectacle than a trial. Karoline, however, wasn't fazed. She walked into the courtroom with the same steely resolve that had made her one of the most formidable figures in the White House. But even her unshakable confidence couldn't prepare her for the shocking turn of events that would soon unfold. Judge Amy Coney Barrett, the presiding judge, had a reputation for her no-nonsense approach to legal matters. Known for her conservative rulings, she was admired by many but also criticized for her unwavering commitment to strict interpretations of the law. What few expected, however, was that she would deliver a ruling that would leave Karoline and the entire nation stunned. It was during the final moments of the trial that the bombshell was dropped. As the court gathered for the final judgment, all eyes were on Judge Barrett. The room fell silent as she stood up, preparing to deliver her decision. The tension was palpable. Everyone knew this case was about to make history. "I have reviewed the evidence thoroughly," Judge Barrett began, her voice steady. "I have considered the legal arguments put forward by both the prosecution and the defense. In light of the information presented, I am compelled to impose a fine of $500 million on the defendant, Karoline Leavitt, for her role in obstructing the free flow of information and deliberately misleading the American public." The words hit like a thunderclap. Karoline's expression remained unchanged, but inside, she was reeling. $500 million, an amount so staggering that it seemed almost surreal. Her mind raced as she processed the magnitude of the ruling. The fine wasn't just a financial penalty, it was an attempt to strip her of her credibility, her authority, and her power. The courtroom erupted in shock. Some applauded the decision, while others muttered in disbelief. Journalists from every outlet in the room had their phones out, quickly tweeting the news. The headline was already taking shape: Judge Amy Coney Barrett fines Karoline Leavitt $500 million, the biggest legal blow to a White House press secretary in history. Outside the courtroom, the political world was abuzz. How could this happen? Was this a personal attack on Karoline, or was it a genuine legal decision? Was this the beginning of a larger movement to hold the administration accountable for its actions? Karoline's legal team immediately filed an appeal, arguing that the fine was excessive and unwarranted. But as the appeal process began, another shocking development occurred. Karoline herself made an unprecedented move that left the entire nation speechless. The fine had been set, but Karoline Leavitt was far from defeated. As her legal team scrambled to appeal the court's decision, Karoline took a step that no one saw coming. She called for a press conference, something she had done countless times in her career, but this time there was a sense of urgency in her voice. The White House press secretary had a reputation for handling difficult situations with poise, but this time it was different. This was not a typical briefing. The media gathered in the press room, murmurs of curiosity rippling through the crowd. Reporters were still buzzing with questions about the fine, wondering what Karoline's next move would be. Some expected her to defend herself vigorously, blaming the decision on political bias. Others speculated that she would try to downplay the severity of the fine, hoping to calm the storm, but when Karoline stepped up to the podium, the room fell silent. "Good afternoon," she began, her voice calm but resolute. "I know many of you are still processing the ruling made by Judge Amy Coney Barrett, and believe me, so am I. $500 million is not a number that can be easily ignored. It's a staggering amount, and I understand the gravity of it." The reporters shifted in their seats, their pens poised, ready for her next words. Karoline continued, "But today, I want to talk not just about the fine, but about what it represents, the attempt to silence this administration and, by extension, me. This fine is not just a financial penalty. It is an attack on freedom of speech and freedom of information. For a moment, there was an uneasy pause. Reporters exchanged glances, unsure of where this was heading. Karoline, however, was not done. I have spent my career fighting for the truth. I have stood at this podium day after day, answering your questions, addressing the issues that matter to the American people. I have done so with one goal in mind, to serve the truth no matter how difficult it may be. And I will not let anyone, no matter their position, tell me that I cannot do my job, Karoline declared, her voice growing stronger with each word. The press room was on edge, captivated by her defiance. I know what this ruling means, but I also know that America is watching, she continued. And I know that the American people believe in fairness and justice. This fine may have been imposed on me, but it is not just about me, it is about the principles this country was founded on. It is about standing up for what is right, even when the odds are stacked against you. She paused for a moment, letting her words sink in. Then Karoline did something truly unexpected. She turned to the reporters and said, "I'm not going to appeal this decision. In fact, I'm going to pay the fine." A collective gasp swept through the room. The idea that Karoline Leavitt, a high-ranking government official, would pay a $500 million fine was almost unthinkable. It was an amount so large that it would have financially ruined most people. But Karoline's next words stunned everyone into silence. "I'll pay the fine with my own money, not a penny of taxpayer dollars. If the courts believe this fine is justified, then I will bear the burden of it and I will continue to serve this administration with integrity and honor," she said. The room was still, the weight of her decision hanging in the air. Some of the reporters couldn't believe what they had just heard. It wasn't just a political move, it was a personal sacrifice, an act of defiance against what she saw as an unjust ruling. The idea of a White House press secretary taking such a drastic step was unheard of. This wasn't a simple apology or an attempt to placate the court. This was a bold statement, one that would echo through the halls of Washington, D.C. and beyond, but what Karoline did next was even more shocking than the fine itself. She didn't just accept the ruling. She used it as a platform to address the very issue that had brought her to this point in the first place, the fight for truth in an age of misinformation. "I am not the first person to face a legal battle because of political pressures, and I won't be the last. But I will not let this fine define me. I will not be silenced," she declared, her voice unwavering. "This is not just about me, it's about every American who believes in free speech and the right to access information. This is about standing up for what is right, even when the consequences seem insurmountable." Her speech was powerful, and as she finished, she left the podium with her head held high. The press room was left in stunned silence, the weight of her words settling over the crowd. Karoline Leavitt's press conference went viral within minutes. The entire nation was talking about her unexpected decision to accept and personally pay the $500 million fine imposed by Judge Coney Barrett. The media exploded with coverage, and while some viewed her actions as a bold display of independence and integrity, others wondered whether her move was a carefully calculated political stunt. The question on everyone's mind was, why did she choose this route and what would happen next? In Washington, the political ramifications were immediate. President Donald Trump, who had always been a fierce defender of Karoline's work in the White House, praised her publicly. Karoline has always fought for the American people, and she's shown today that she'll fight even harder when faced with adversity. This is the kind of leadership we need in Washington, unafraid, undeterred, and committed to the truth, he said in a statement to the press. The White House press secretary's personal sacrifice became a point of pride for the administration. "It's an incredible act of courage," said a senior administration official. By taking this step, Karoline is showing that no matter what the political establishment throws at her, she will remain steadfast. This is leadership. Yet, not everyone shared that sentiment. The fine, which had been imposed by a conservative judge, was now becoming a partisan issue. Democratic leaders, many of whom had been critical of the Trump administration's handling of information, seized on the situation as proof of the president's disregard for the law. They argued that Karoline's actions were not a show of bravery but rather an attempt to manipulate the system and avoid real accountability. Karoline Leavitt has made her name by skirting the truth, and now, she's using her wealth to pay her way out of responsibility. "This is not courage, this is manipulation," said Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer in a scathing press release. But while the political establishment debated, Karoline's response was not what anyone expected. She remained unshaken by the criticism. In fact, her resolve only seemed to strengthen as the weeks went on. Karoline's social media pages, once filled with routine updates about her press briefings and work at the White House, were now filled with messages of support from ordinary Americans. From the heartland to the coasts, people expressed admiration for her willingness to stand up for her principles regardless of the consequences. Some even started online campaigns with hashtags like #StandWithCaroline and #TruthOverPower, rallying behind her message of courage and integrity. Meanwhile, her legal team continued to appeal the fine, but the process was slow. The higher courts were taking their time to review the case, and the issue continued to drag out in the public eye. Some legal experts argued that Judge Barrett's ruling was unprecedented in its severity, but others believed it would serve as a significant test of the system's commitment to impartiality. As Karoline faced the consequences of her decision, a new debate began to take shape in the political and legal spheres. Was this fine a reflection of a broken system, or was it a necessary measure to ensure accountability in the face of government corruption? Despite the controversy, Karoline's handling of the situation earned her respect in unexpected quarters. Business leaders who had once been hesitant to associate with her due to the political climate began to quietly offer support. Corporate executives, public figures, and even some members of the media reached out privately to commend her for the bold stance she had taken. Many noted that Karoline's willingness to pay the fine was a rare move in a political world where many officials routinely used taxpayer money to shield themselves from personal consequences. As the weeks passed, the fallout from Karoline's decision grew more intense. The country seemed as divided as ever. On one hand, those who saw Karoline as a champion of free speech and integrity, and on the other, those who believed that the fine was just the beginning of an attempt to break the White House's grip on the media. The White House remained a focal point for intense scrutiny. White House correspondents who had been caught up in the back and forth between Karoline and the courts were now openly questioning whether the fine would mark the end of Karoline's career. Some sources from inside the administration whispered that the pressure was mounting on her to step down given the political cost of the ongoing legal battle, but Karoline had no intention of resigning. In a private meeting with President Trump, she had reaffirmed her commitment to her role. "I'm not going anywhere," she said, her voice firm. "This is bigger than me, bigger than the fine. It's about the truth. It's about standing up to a system that wants to silence us. I'm not backing down." Trump, who had faced his own battles with the legal system throughout his career, nodded in agreement. "You've got my full support," he said. "The American people know what's right. They know what you're doing is not only for the truth, but it's also for their freedom." As the case progressed through the courts, public sentiment began to shift. The mainstream media, which had initially criticized Karoline for the fine, began to change their tone. Several opinion pieces noted the symbolic nature of her actions, and more voices joined the chorus of support. A number of political analysts speculated that this moment could represent a turning point in the way Americans viewed their leaders, no longer as untouchable figures but as individuals who could face consequences just like anyone else. But the divisiveness remained. For every person who praised Karoline's courage, there was another who saw her actions as a blatant political maneuver. The divide in the country deepened, and soon, the case became a topic of fierce debate on cable news, radio shows, and social media. One evening, during a live broadcast on CNN, an anchor posed the question, "Is Karoline Leavitt a patriot? Or is she just another politician trying to manipulate the system?" The comments section was flooded with responses, the majority of which were polarizing. Some praised her as a woman of principle, others condemned her as a manipulator. The debate raged on with no clear resolution in sight. As the court case continued to unfold, the situation reached a breaking point. The nation, now deeply entrenched in the controversy surrounding Karoline Leavitt and the $500 million fine, was waiting for something to give, something to signal where the dust would settle. It seemed like everyone had an opinion, but no one could predict how this unprecedented saga would conclude. In the midst of the heated debates and growing tensions, a stunning development occurred, one that would change everything. In a move that completely caught the nation by surprise, Karoline Leavitt made an announcement that left Americans speechless. Standing before the press for another briefing, Karoline's demeanor was calm yet resolute. She wasn't wearing the usual professional attire, but instead she stood there in a simple black suit, her expression serious but unwavering. The room fell silent as she began to speak. "I've spent a lot of time thinking about this case, about the fine, and about what it represents for our country," she began. "For weeks, I've been focused on the legal aspects, the political ramifications, and the personal toll it's taken. But today, I want to talk about something different. Today, I want to take a step that not only shocks you but will also hopefully shock the very system that's trying to tear us apart." Her voice wavered slightly as she continued. I've been trying to do the right thing, the noble thing, the thing that I thought would restore order and show strength. But after everything I've seen, I've realized that perhaps the way forward isn't through the courts. It's not through money. It's not through fighting. It's through something deeper, something that transcends everything we've been caught up in. Karoline paused, taking a deep breath as the media hung on every word. So, I've decided to make a move that will, quite frankly, leave the courts and the world speechless. Instead of paying the fine with my own money, I am donating the entire amount of $500 million to a fund that will support legal defense for those who have been wrongfully convicted, for people whose voices have been silenced, and for Americans who believe in the integrity of our justice system. The room was completely still. No one moved. No one spoke. The weight of her words hung in the air. I believe in justice. I believe in the rule of law, Karoline continued. And I believe that if we're truly going to move this country forward, we have to remember the core values that make America great. We can't allow a system that punishes individuals unjustly to persist. I'm doing this not just for myself, but for the people who need it the most, the ones who are overlooked, ignored, and forgotten. It was a decision so shocking that it took everyone a moment to process. The $500 million, a sum so vast it could change the lives of many, would no longer go into the hands of the courts. Instead, it would be redirected to those who needed it most. Karoline's announcement sent waves of disbelief across the nation. The immediate reaction was a mixture of shock, admiration, and skepticism. News outlets across the country were buzzing with reports. People on both sides of the political divide were stunned by the audacity of Karoline's move. Even her critics couldn't help but respect the courage it took to make such a dramatic gesture. Karoline Leavitt has always been a fighter, but this move is something entirely different, said a political commentator on MSNBC. It's an unprecedented act of charity, but also a powerful statement against a system that she believes is broken. The question now is whether this will be the beginning of a new movement or if it's just a political stunt. But Karoline wasn't concerned with what the pundits said. She had made her choice, and it wasn't about pleasing anyone. It was about standing for something greater than herself, even if it meant losing everything. Across the nation, social media exploded with support and criticism. On Twitter, hashtags like #CarolineForChange and #JusticeForThePeople began to trend. While many hailed her as a hero, others continued to accuse her of using this as a way to further her political agenda. The divide in the country only deepened, but Karoline had made her mark both as a political figure and as a person willing to take bold steps for what she believed in. Washington, the White House issued a statement backing Karoline's decision. President Trump, who had supported her throughout the ordeal, praised her generosity and courage. Karoline's decision today shows the kind of leader she truly is, he said. She has always put the American people first, and this is no different. I stand with her in this noble act, and I believe history will show that she did the right thing. But outside the political world, the reaction was more complex. Human rights activists, particularly those advocating for prison reform, praised Karoline's donation. The $500 million fund would go toward legal defense teams, resources for inmates who had been wrongfully convicted, and efforts to reform the criminal justice system. It was a massive contribution to a cause that had been at the heart of numerous national debates, yet some couldn't escape the feeling that Karoline's actions were still a political maneuver, a way to win over public support in the midst of her ongoing legal troubles. It was difficult for some to separate her bold act of charity from the larger political context in which it had occurred, the long-term impact, a legacy defined by action months later as the legal case against Karoline continued to drag on. The effects of her decision were still being felt. The fund she had created began to draw attention from around the world, with major media outlets covering its impact on the criminal justice system. Stories of individuals whose lives had been changed by Karoline's donation flooded the airwaves, and the movement she had sparked began to grow. For Karoline, the personal and professional fallout from the fine had not been easy, but she had emerged stronger than ever. Whether or not she would ever fully shake the controversy surrounding the $500 million fine was yet to be seen, but one thing was certain: she had reshaped the narrative. Her legacy, for better or worse, would be defined by her willingness to act when the stakes were highest, her commitment to what she believed was right, and her ultimate decision to use her position of power to fight for those who had no voice. Karoline Leavitt had been fined $500 million. But in the end, she had paid a price that went far beyond money. She had made a sacrifice of principle, one that would leave the nation talking for years to come. And while the world continued to debate the meaning of her actions, Karoline's place in history was assured, not as a victim of the system, but as a woman who had refused to be silenced.